everybody hear me like this? Dear panel, dear audience, imagine you're in a hospital bed, terminally ill, no light at the end of the tunnel. But because of your sickness, you immensely suffer and feel immense pain. You already die a little inside every single day. By giving these people the right to die, we give themselves the ability to defend themselves against this suffering. And that's why we come to you under the team line, that our life is for the purpose of happiness, not for the purpose of suffering. And under this team line, we bring to you a few things. First of all, I will tell you why a right to a good life requires a right to die. And second of all, I will tell you why these individuals are able to make a choice which prevents suffering. My second speaker, Urbi, will talk about how we help the most people in most situations. But before I move on to my substantive, let me clarify this debate by giving our policy and our burden. So what is our policy? We support the basic broad principle of the right to die. But let's ground this debate in the real world first. We think this means that people have the ability to assisted suicide or euthanasia. And if in cases where people are under 18 are mentally unfit, we will allow them to outsource this right to others like parents and relatives. What is our burden in today's debate? We think that if we can prove to you that we give the most people in this debate the life they want by giving them the right to end that life, we can take this debate. I think this also is the reason they deserve this right, because we stand behind the principle of upholding the best possible life. Furthermore, if individuals want information, consultation, or psychological help before they go into this decision, we will offer this. The same procedure applies with every single medical decision we already make, and is no different than that. So let's start off with my first point of substantive. Let's talk about why the right to life requires the right to die. And the basic principle behind this argument is that a right to life is only meaningful with a good life, and it's necessary to uphold this with the right to die. Imagine again that you are a terminally ill patient. Your right to life is not absolute, but exists to give you a meaningful good life. Because the reason we gave you that life in the first place was to maximize your happiness. So if you are no longer living that way, if you're sitting in the hospital bed, if you are suffering each and every single day, we don't think that that's a good life, and people should have the ability to choose what their good life is. And they might think, well, being alive is always relatively better than having no life at all. But the suffering of each and every single day sitting in a bed outweighs the benefits of other life. Because another reason we give the right to life is to hold other rights, like the right to free speech, the right to debate. But that terminally ill patient may decide that that right to debate, or the right to free speech, is no longer important to him anymore, and less important than his suffering at that point of information. We all agree in this debate on the right to life. Otherwise, we would not be sitting here. But we think that if you want to have a really right to life, that life should also be good. And therefore, you uphold this fundamental right to have a good life by giving people the ability to end that very life. So, when we give a patient the right to die, they can have the best possible life. When they look back at it, they will not think of the suffering. They will not think of the pain, they think of the happy memories they had. And we already allow similar things in these circumstances, right? If you are suffering from cancer, the hospital denies you, gives you the opportunity to not undergo chemotherapy and not have that very suffering for the last months, so you can have the best last months of your life as possible. So if we can prove to you then in my second argument that people are good at making this decision and ensuring their life to the best way possible, we think they should have this right in those circumstances. So before I move on to prove that,
yes. Why shouldn't the mentally ill be allowed to slit their throats to escape crushing depression and sadness, just as the terminally ill do to escape crushing pain?
So this directly leads to the point I'm now going to make, why those terminally ill and those people suffering from traumatic experience can actually make a very good decision. But this is important, because if we can then disprove this POI, you already agree that they should have the right to life in these very cases. So let's talk about why this is a choice which prevents suffering. And the principle behind this argument is that we're able to make a choice which will benefit them and they will not regret. But let's say we take them on their grounds. Let's say there are some people who will regret this choice. We're going to accept this. Some people, a minority, will maybe regret this decision. But if we can prove the majority won't, we maximize happiness in this case. But furthermore, even this minority will commit suicide anyway, because they feel so strongly about this case that there is not a police officer on every single cliff in order to prevent them from jumping off it. So it makes no difference even if they are not able to make that decision. So you think you need two things to make your decision. First is information, and second of all is being able to weigh up that information. So let's imagine an old lady. All her relatives, unfortunately, have died. She's sitting at home, feeling lonely and feeling sad. So we think, first of all, that this lady has good information. So why? The first reason is that she exactly knows what her life is going to be like in the future. She knows that from past experience. She knows her relatives are not going to come back. But even if she did, the second reason is that there might be a risk that her life gets better, that she will meet someone new, a new man who will bring love and happiness in her life. But we allow her to take this risk of not being able to, that being going to happen. Just in the same way, we would allow all of you to go on a parachute trip if you want to, because we can take the risk of something going wrong. But even thirdly, even if you maybe know that that's going to happen, we think you can decide if that's going to be worth it or not. You can say, his current suffering of loneliness and sadness is always going to weigh up against everything that will happen afterwards. Even if it's winning the lottery, even if it's finding new love, then you can always say in those cases, that's not important to me anymore. So they might think, well, you don't know what's going to happen after that. So two things to note about this. First of all, that doesn't really matter, because you can say everything that happens after that is always going to be worse than the present. But second of all, that happens on either side of the house, because you're always going to die at some point in time. So it's also the case on your side of the house. Let's secondly look at that now, weighing up this information, given she has all the time. This is an incredibly important decision. We are talking here about ending your life. The most valuable thing you have, and the most important thing you have. It's the biggest decision of your entire life, even though it might end the next day. So therefore, you're going to think very intensely about it. And that's why it's not a rash decision from terminally ill patients. That's why it's not a rash decision from people suffering from psychological breakdown. They will think about it intensely. What does that do? First of all, they will take their immense amount of time to think about it. What does that mean? That means they will weigh up every single thing. They will take every single possible step into account what could happen. Even love, if they haven't had that in the past 10 years. So we'll think about every single thing. But furthermore, what's important is that they will think about it in the long term and not make a rash decision in the very instant. That lady, sitting in that house, has all the time in the world to think about it and not going to make a rash decision because she thinks it's that important to her people. So that loneliness is still going to haunt her. And if she then chooses to die, she has lived her way in the way she wanted it. Their side denies her that opportunity by not giving her the right to die. But furthermore, as I mentioned earlier, let's say we take it on their grounds and people still jump off that cliff. That is a much more painful way to die than with assisted suicide in a controlled environment with a doctor near you to help you and to give you information about how it's going to end. Imagine the fear and the pain you feel when you jump off a cliff. So not only will this happen anyway, we protect her from even more pain when she does it in those instances. So what have we given you? We protect the terminally ill patient from suffering and sticking to his bed. We protect that lady from suffering a life of loneliness and give her the ability to live the life she wanted. That's why you voted for opposition.
When social workers talk to people who attempted to take their own lives, but survived or were saved, 2/3 of them told them that as they jumped off the edge, as they plunged into oblivion, they gravely regretted their decision. In Proposition's world, there will be no policemen waiting below to save these people. Their friends will not be allowed to pull them back from the edge because they have a right to die. We believe that death is always a false choice and always an irreversible and illegitimate decision. And that's why we are proud to stand on opposition. What is our model? First of all, we will not allow people to choose to commit suicide or assisted suicide. This means that doctors should not be allowed to give lethal injections. This means that if police officers see a teenage boy sitting on the edge of a building about to jump off, they are legally obliged to save him. We'll do everything we can to focus on supporting and making the lives of these people better. For instance, by funding counseling for the depressed or palliative care for the terminally ill. We're going to forward 3 arguments. First, that the right to die is always an illegitimate and false choice. Secondly, that it causes harm to others, and my second speaker will tell you why it retrogrades care for individuals. But before that, let's deal with the case by asking 2 questions. First, does death help people live a good life? Secondly, can they make this choice? First of all, about the good life. They told us that people should be allowed to free themselves from suffering because their lives will not get any better. In the vast majority of cases, this is just an assertion. The vast majority of cases when people opt for assisted suicide, they do so out of crushing poverty, which might get better. They do so because they're students who have failed exams, circumstances which might get better. By saying that their lives will never get better, they have reduced this debate to the sliver of cases of patients which are terminally ill. But let's take them on their grounds anyway. We think that for patients who are terminally ill, medical science has advanced to the point that there are a number of ways to make their lives better. Perhaps not ideal, but we have ways to mitigate their pain, palliative care, to prevent them from suffering as much. As a consequence, we think that their lives just aren't as bad as they think they are. They told us that this is similar to not undergoing chemotherapy. No, it's not, because chemotherapy is an uncertain medical process that could result in massive future risks. We think that's completely disanalogous. Then they told us it's similar to flying a parachute, guys, because you might die. Honestly, the difference is that when you fly a parachute, the person administering the process does everything he can to make sure that you will survive. When you opt for suicide, the person makes sure that you will die. The next thing they told us was that individuals won't regret this, and the individuals who do are in the minority. First of all, this is an assertion. As I've shown you, many individuals do regret this decision. Moreover, we think that protecting the right of a minority is sometimes more important if that right is the right to life. The crucial harm of their policy is that more people will choose to take their own lives because people believe the rhetoric that they give them, that their lives are terrible. More will choose to take up this decision because they believe that there is a way out. So on their side, more people will make this choice. Moreover, we think that principle is inconsistent because if they really believe that individuals have a right to die, why only restrict this right when it happens in a hospital, ladies and gentlemen? So we think that's inconsistent. Moreover, they told us that individuals can outsource this right to like their parents. Guys, we think this is terrible. This means that a parent can choose whether or not his child wants to commit suicide, wants to die. They legitimize all kinds of terrible abuses that make their policy illegitimate. Secondly, are people in fact placed to decide? They told us that people can make this choice because they have some information. We put to you that death is unique, above and beyond all other decisions that people make, because you have no approximation of what it's like after you die. You have an approximation. You can talk to your friends of almost every other decision you make, but you have no such approximation when you choose to end your life. Then they told us that people take a long time to decide whether or not they want to commit suicide. No, most suicides happen in split seconds, happen under duress. The lonely lady living alone is not the average person who chooses to commit suicide. They're often people who lose money at a casino and choose to jump off a building. People who choose to commit suicide because they have bad grades. This is a disingenuous characterization coming from their side. I'm going to transition now to my first argument about why suicide is almost always a false choice. Here I'll flash directly in their material about how people can choose. The first of this argument is that we should stop people from making decisions that are made under duress, irreversible, and with uncertain outcomes. Generally, states step in on the behalf of individuals when they are unable to make decisions for themselves. If a right will almost always be made under circumstances of false choice, we believe that it is not a legitimate right. We think there are 3 criteria for a choice to be illegitimate, and the choice to die meets all these criteria. First, that it's made under duress. Secondly, that it's irreversible. And third, that it's uncertain implication. So first of all, why is it made under duress? And as they have explained, the choice to kill yourself is almost always made under severe pressures of terminal illness or economic pressures. People who have depression because they are retrenched in a moment. Poor people who have lost a huge amount of money at the casino. Yes.
Would you allow people to undergo a spinal surgery which is 95% of going to die?
So we think that if the decision ultimately results in them being saved from a certain death, then yes, we would allow this decision. But if the decision ultimately results in a very high chance of death when the person might otherwise not have died, then no, we wouldn't allow it. That's our answer. So we think that poor people often have lost a huge amount of money at the casino. These are individuals who are under a huge amount of duress and therefore choose to commit suicide. In 2008, after the financial meltdown, an additional 22,000 people attempted suicide due to financial difficulties. While we sympathize with their difficulties, we generally don't allow people with psychological ailments, people under severe economic duress, from making important, life-changing decisions. And as such, we cannot allow them to commit suicide. Secondly, the choice to die is irreversible. Yes, all choices to some extent are irreversible, but the question is about gradation. Death is unique because it obviates and removes all other choices and all other experiences you might possibly have. Other choices generally allow you to opt out in the future, but there is no opt-out clause when you die. This is made worse by the fact that most people regret these decisions, as I have already explained. Third, the choice to die is inherently uncertain and made under conditions of imperfect information, because no one knows what it's like after you die. You can't weigh the choices and outcomes unlike any other decision. In all other decisions, there's an approximation of information. For example, if I want to sign up for a job, I can do so because I can talk to co-workers and friends about what it's likely to be like. I have no way of knowing what it's likely to be like when I die. Therefore, suicide fails the criteria for informed choice, and therefore we can't allow it. This is similar to how we don't allow people to voluntarily sign themselves into slavery, because often these decisions are made under huge economic duress. They are by nature irreversible and therefore illegitimate choices. Therefore, our side makes their lives better in a way that is far better than this once and for all ill-informed decision, because we have counseling, because we have medical services like palliative care. Yes.
Even if everything you say is true, won't that same person still jump off the cliff in a more painful way?
No, I don't think so. Because once you illegalize it, as I'll go on to explain, you make it far more illegitimate. You attach a moral stigma to it, and moreover, you prevent individuals from copycatting this action. You prevent individuals from jumping off the bandwagon. I'll go on to explain it now in my second argument about harms to others. Even if we admit that people can make this choice, legitimizing suicide results in more deaths, which both sides agree is objectively bad. A choice to commit suicide encourages a cult of self-harm, because individuals realize that suicide is an option at the point at which others start engaging with it, at the point at which they see perhaps their close friends or other individuals very far away committing suicide. Seeing another person kill themselves often puts a thought in the heads of people, tipping the balance between choosing life and death. That's why in Japan and Korea, after every given school suicide, the number of teens who take their own life increases exponentially. Moreover, the state legitimizing suicide also normalizes it as a legitimate means to die, removing the stigma associated with it. So even if people can make this choice, more people choosing to die is generally terrible. On opposition, we believe that at the crossroads of life, we cannot choose the path of death. We're very powerful.
Some people do know that there's no light at the end of the tunnel. And they will know that they're going to suffer every day, and there's no chance to stop that. Those people all fall under the principle that we're running, and that's the debate that we're having, that if you know that it's not going to be better, that's when that right should always be upheld. So we think that they failed to engage with the underlying principle of our case and just tried to talk about the superficial things. In my own speech, I'm going to deal with these and counter those, attack the superficial ideas, and then I'm also going to set forth the principle that we had. And that's how we come together the team line that our life is for the purpose of happiness, not for the purpose of suffering. Before I move on to my constructive, why we actually help most people live the best life possible under our side, and that's why we win the trade-off of happy lives, let's first talk about what this debate was about. Because we think that we defended two groups in our speech, and I'm going to move on to this in my constructive as well. But we did talk about the terminally ill people, right? And they claimed that we were narrowing the debate, but we didn't do so because we talked about the other group as well. We talked about why the terminally ill were a particularly important group, because they are know that they are sick and that they're not going to be better. They are going to suffer, and the only thing that they told us was that there's palliative care. We think that that doesn't mean that it's not going to be excruciating. We think that you can still choose to. So though that group still falls under our principle. But then, on the majority, we told you that we did engage because Gold's entire speech was also about like the old lady who's not terminally ill and is depressed, right? We gave you analysis why she can make the good choice, why she is able to assess the risk that she is making the bad choice, and why it then still is legitimate. They didn't engage with that entire point and just strawman our case by saying we talked about terminally ill people. That was not the case. Please respond to our first speaker. So now on to 2 points of rebuttal. And the first is on an inconsistency that lies within their stance. Because we tell you that even on their side, there are cases where they allow people to choose for life that they want to lead or for death. What is an example of this? If you were a football player and you were paralyzed in an accident, and you know that there's a surgery that has a 5% success rate of having you restore your limbs. We think that in that case, you can still choose to die in the other 95% chances because that 5% chance is so important for you. And that if you do die, then you're happy to forsake that because you wouldn't want to live either way. We think that in that case, they support that type of surgery, which means that they support you being able to choose the life you want or otherwise dying. We think that that's why that's an inconsistency. We also think that, for example, religious people like Jehovah's Witnesses under their side are allowed not to choose for blood transfusion, right? Which also means that their kids are very likely to die, and that means that they are still allowed to, that they also fall under our side because we help those people as well. And then lastly, they told us that we were inconsistent because we said that you're only allowed to do so in a hospital. And we never said this, right? We said that if it is legal, you're likely to go to a hospital because it's the least painful way to die. We are happy to support the right and principle in general. That's what our first speaker analyzed and was never responded to. So, and on to the second point of rebuttal, and this will directly deal with the first argument and second argument of the first speaker. And we think that you here told us when you can make a fair choice based on certain criteria, right? That it's irreversible, like you make the proper choice. And we think that lots of this analysis we also had in our speech because we also know when you can make the proper choice. So we explained to you why an old lady can assess the risk that her life is going to be better, but also assess what type of life she's going to lead soon. We think that therefore they didn't engage with this. But let's do so even further, because we think that the fact that you're going to die is something that's going to happen on both sides, right? So we think that that's an irreversible state that you're going to end up in either way. We think that therefore the only thing that is a difference between both sides is how you live your life on this planet and how long you want to live that life. So it's not about what we know what's going to happen after that, because that's on both sides of the house. It's about if you know that this life that you're leading is too painful for you to do so, you'd rather move on to the second phase, which you're going to get by anyway, right? So we think that people are very well able to assess this in most cases when people think of suicide. Because we think that those people are aware of what their life is now, and we think that the people that do commit suicide often do have a good assessment like Gold's analyzed. But even if this is not the case, we tell you that we help people. Proposition wants to help, and I'm going to move into that in my constructive. But before that, yes.
Why is the desire to escape psychological pain less valid than the desire to escape physical pain? Hence why you won't allow every single person with a mental illness to do this.
Thank you. I never said that. We never told you that was the case. We told you that with most medical procedures, if a person is incapable to do so, in the status quo, we already give parents or relatives the right to handle it. Right? We said that from our first speech and we were very clear. It happens right now with children who don't have the right to make medical decisions, that's why their parents make them. And it happens right now with mentally disabled, when their family can decide what type of medical procedures happen. Therefore, we give them the right, but we outsource it to someone who can take care of them. Please engage with the actual plot. No, thank you. So on to my constructive on why every actor in the group with us today is better off under our side. And in this point, I'm going to prove why two groups are better off. First, the ones that actually know that their life is not going to be better for medical reasons. The second group is the group that is trying to commit suicide for non-medical reasons, and why they're still better off under our side. No, thank you. And in the end, I'm going to prove to you why the majority of people are most happy under our side. So even if they win some people that make the wrong decision, we think that this debate is about the overall trade-off and why we still win, even if they get away with some of those people. So, on the first group on the medically ill, and I'll be very short in this because they never actually contested most of the analysis we gave out, right? Which was that terminally ill people actually have a very good understanding that they're not going to be like suicide pain, I think that then you're able to assess that. That group still falls in our survey and falls in our principle. But moving on to the second group, the ones that opposition specifically want to talk about, that do this for a non-medical reason. And we're going to tell you two things. We're going to tell you that we actually help these people, and they're better off under our side. But even if that's not the case, even if they do commit suicide without wanting to, we tell you that this is a smaller group than the group we're helping. And we tell you, so we told you that, as they said, these suicides often happen in a moment of a second because they're so emotionally overwhelmed. Which means that they're likely to happen on their side of the house. And their entire case was practical, which means that if they're going to tell us that those people are going to commit suicide on our side, it's going to happen under their side as well because of their own logic, right? But then they told us that social workers actually talked to some people who are suicidal, and they actually were able to convince them that it was a wrong decision to do so. Those suicidal people will be far more likely to talk to those social workers when they know that that social worker is not going to report them, and that social worker is not likely to say you shouldn't commit suicide, but when that social worker is actually willing to engage with that person. It means that the suicidal person under our side is far more likely to engage with the people, and thus we're more likely to dissuade lots of people from committing suicide, winning on the practical side of opposition itself. But even if that's not the case, we tell you that this group, which would never commit suicide under their side, but suddenly would if it now is legal, they never explain that link, which means that that group is very small. Which means that in the best case, we prove why we help for people, worst case, the group is smaller than the others. Therefore, vote to proposition.
Team proposition. The right to die is so important that one, you must know that your life will never get better. You must have weighed out the long-term consequences. You must do it in a specific environment of the hospital. You must seek the help of the worker. You must seek out a social worker, and you must be really old or terminally ill. This practically cuts out the majority of the people who want to access the right to die. Salient analysis we got through the first speaker, we heard no response. And here's the thing, most people will tell you that if you prohibit the majority of individuals to actualize a right, it no longer becomes a right that is meaningful. Don't let proposition get away by saying that everyone else is, I quote, merely analysis. Because they are not. There are individuals who sit on the edge of a roof simply because they have lost millions of dollars at a casino. There are individuals who have failed the test and believe life will never get better. There are individuals who slit their throats because of an economic downturn and they believe they will forever be in poverty. These are the real individuals in today's debate, not merely analysis as proposition like we put it. So let's talk about two things. No, thank you, sir. First, how do we protect individuals? And second, how do we protect society? First, how do we protect individuals? My first speaker gave you three compelling thresholds by which we negate a choice and point at which we fulfill these three thresholds. We never heard a clear response to each of them, but let's deal with what they gave us. First, US. Their only response was an assertion that people think about the long-term consequences of choosing the right to die. First, we see that they seldom do this. Listen to the second speaker's entire substantive appeal. She said, many people can be dissuaded from the choice to die. What does this actually mean? It means that most of these people people, if they had taken a split-second decision to jump off a building, would have regretted that decision to die. Researchers they only admit most people do not consider, thank you madam, the long-term decisions to die anyway. More importantly, they will put no safeguards on individuals who choose to die. So listen, they say, we'll let anyone and everyone do this. This is dangerous, because that is when you allow for split-second decisions. That is when you allow for individuals who did not make long-term considerations to choose to die. We asked them, what about the mentally ill? No, thank you. The only response to that, we will outsource this fight. Okay, the point in which you can outsource certain things stops when it ends every single other right. So it's fine if someone else can make a decision whether or not to continue perhaps giving you some type of medication or stopping the form of medical care. By the point at which you base your entire case on a person's assessment of his own happiness, how can you ever explain to us why a medically ill patient can have his happiness assessed by someone else? We heard no compelling response because they were only willing to fight on the sliver of cases of the terminally ill and of the really old individuals. So, consensus is simple. At the point at which all the choice of organism ends, the rest is an important factor that negates this choice. Please.
Why would you make a rash decision about the most valuable and important thing you have, merely your life?
Because very often you think that there is no hope left. Very often when you are faced with the pressure of an economic downturn where you have lost all your money, or when you have gambled all your money away, you think that there is no saving for you. And very often, at the point at which you say you have the right to die, it is the state saying it is a fine option for you to choose to die. Your life will be fine, or perhaps even better, if you have chosen to die. Their language of how you can be happy after you die, you can be happy in which you end all suffering in the here and now, is exactly the kind of consideration people keep in mind and cause them to make this rash decision. Do not stand for that. Second threshold we gave you, it is irreversible. We said sometimes life can get better, especially for the terminally ill. So we did engage on this ground. I'm going to prove to you my substantive argument later why life often gets better only if you don't have the right to die. And I'll flag it out for you. They claim there are some surgeries that have a 95% chance of death. Okay, but let's make it very clear. The people who opt into this surgery want the 5% of survival. They don't want the 95% where they'll be paralyzed and die. So yes, people can opt into this surgery because they want to live. Blood transfusion, we'll make it compulsory. They claim it will happen anyway. That is not the debate. It's about making death quicker and more immediate. That is our consideration today. So don't let them get away with the language that it will happen anyway. But the final thing is that it is uncertain. And no, listen to the language of the first video. It's a bit bizarre. They say, you do not know what death is like, but you can say living is worse. No, you can't. Because you don't know what death is like. You cannot ever make an adjudication as to whether or not it will be worse or better than death. So that is illogical right from their first speaker. We asked them, would you allow individuals to thank you to consent to consensual slavery? No response. And in fact, we say we cannot accept the minority of cases of people who do choose to die. Because very often these people regret and it ends all other choices. So they cannot make a quick rash comment by saying, we just accept the minority of people who regret anything. Because this is important. For the minority of people who choose to die, we cannot let them do so. Governments exist to protect the most vulnerable. And that is how, on all three thresholds, we protect the individual. So thank you, man. Second, we protect society. We read an entire argument about the cult of self-harm and often how it's a tipping point at the point at which you see someone killing themselves and it becomes legitimate for everyone else. No response. I'm going to further this now in my substantive argument about how they retrofit care for individuals. And we'll talk a little bit about palliative care and the incentives behind funding palliative care and making life better for people, especially the terminally ill, since that's what they want to base their case upon. So I'm going to show you how we protect the wider society. So, this argument will show that enshrining the right to die really diminishes the political will to improve palliative care. And this happens for two reasons. The first reason is that there is a reduced campaign for improvements in palliative care. And this is the most intuitive part of the argument. But before I show you why, please.
We told you why you're more likely to talk to a social worker when you aren't afraid of being dissuaded or attacked for your decision. So we're more likely to dissuade the people under our side, so say suicidal work.
Okay, so why? You admit that they will be dissuaded. So you admit that most people do make rash decisions. So that's the bulk of your first speaker's material contradicted already. Second, no, they won't speak to a social worker because you already told them it's fine to die. So they just kill themselves at the point at which you believe it is a legitimate choice for you to exercise and you believe your suffering is something that you cannot bear. So many individuals do make this own decision only at the point in which states say it is a fine decision for you to make. Moving on, how does reduced campaigning for palliative care happen? So when people are actualizing what to die, it is very intuitive that the number of individuals who need and will campaign for palliative care will decrease. This often means less political capital and reduced investment in better palliative care. As much as it is an important thing to invest in, very often we regret the corporate incentives that exist to invest in palliative care. So when corporations see a diminished use of palliative care, because people who are terminally ill choose to end their lives, that is when there will be reduced investment to make palliative care better. Second, there is reduced voter backing. Voters are often distant individuals who make decisions sometimes on the basis of cold dollars and cents. At the point in which the right to die is enshrined, it becomes easy to say from a distance that they have an easy way out, that they have easily chosen to die, and we should not use our money to help them since they are, as they put it, and I quote them, they are going to die anyway. That is the language, that sort of rhetoric that hurts significant political will for palliative care. But why is this particularly harmful? One, because it hurts people who didn't choose to die. And that is an factor they did not consider in this way. What about those people who are suffering but don't choose to die? Palliative care can sometimes make their life better. It won't be great, we admit that. But at the very least, we can reduce the suffering as much as possible. Second, especially because it hurts the lives of individuals who did not choose to die, it pressures individuals, especially the terminally ill, to take up the option of right life. So, even if we admit US doesn't happen in most of the cases, at the point in which they make palliative care so bad, that is when they force people to take up this option. Our society that protects the most vulnerable, that protects society. For all these reasons, we're very proud to stand in opposition.
When you're comparing the cases in this debate and choosing what people you're going to help, you have to consider what people under our side of the house they can never help, and what people under their side of the house are trying to protect, but we're able to protect them better. That is why in my speech I'm going to talk about two clashes. I'm going to talk about who we're helping and why that's not possible without the right to die, and then I'm going to talk about who they protect and how can they be better protected if we have the right to die. And that is why Team Netherlands today comes to you under the team line that our life is for the purpose of happiness and not for the purpose of suffering. So let me start with my first clash, and who do we help? And from the start of this debate, we set forth a case where we said that we help many people who are going to suffer and currently have no opportunity to escape that suffering. So if within this clash I show you that in a vast majority of the cases where suicide is going to occur, we help these people escape suffering, then by proposing, you're empowering these people to not suffer for the rest of their, in that case, very miserable lives. So, within this clash, I'm going to address two very big ideas within this debate. The first idea is, can people decide what is best for them? Second of all, how does this exactly work then with euthanasia, assisted suicide, all the cases that we're helping under our side of the house? No, thank you, sir. So on, can people decide what is best for them? So, in our Prime Minister, we gave you material as to why you can know what is best for you. You can decide what kind of life you want. So then opposition reacted by saying, okay, so death is something you cannot opt out to, and things can definitely get better. We've got two responses. The first response is, you can still decide if this is how you want to live. For example, if I now have a terrible excruciating disease, I might still want to consider if the way I want to now improve maybe is the way that I want to live. Maybe the process to that is a process I'm not willing to undertake. Opposition never gave you any material as to why it is illegitimate for people to deny that. That is exactly in the line that Urmi analyzed, for example, people denying blood transfusions. maybe for you it is so much worse to be rejected by your community by having the idea that, for example, God will now not let you into his kingdom, that is something you're willing to take and forsake your life on earth. We never heard any response as to why that isn't legitimate. But second of all, even if things can get better, we see that in a vast majority of diseases, better is often relative. So instead of having super excruciating pain, you might have still quite a lot of pain. We tell you that against a vast majority of terminal diseases, even if they think that Western medicine is getting better, that is not the case, right? So we tell you that it is still bad, it is still suffering that you're undertaking, still suffering that we are liberating you from, but moreover, that the road to improvement is one that you might not want to walk. We never heard any analysis as to why you should be obliged to do that. We never heard any analysis as to why it is legitimate to force a Jehovah's Witness to get a blood transfusion, because we think that is something we don't force people because we still give them bodily autonomy.
So,
before I move on to the next idea within this clash, yes, sir.
if you believe that the choice to die is a personal one, why would you let the parents or relatives of children with depression or mental illness kill them?
Okay, this is what I'm going to address in my second idea about euthanasia-assisted suicide and how even in those cases the people will benefit. But let me start from the beginning of this idea, right? So, at this moment, there are lots of people who want to die, but need to do so in a horrible way, right? So, as opposition said, they need to slash their wrists, they need to jump off a cliff. First reaction, on proposition side, we're giving them a tool not to do that in that way. We believe that that is already much better for them. We believe that if these people are going to commit suicide, then the fairest way to maximize their happiness is to give them a tool that isn't that excruciating for them and for their family. Second response is that it's not a split-second decision. This is analysis that was in Urmi's speech and Flora's speech, but I'll repeat it again. We believe that this is a very important decision. If you are considering all the options, then probably you're not going to make a split-second decision. Within my next class, I'm going to specifically address why they don't help people who make split-second decisions, how that also is bad under their side of the house. Third response, and that's specifically about the mentally ill, we believe that people who, for example, have schizophrenia are people that we don't allow to make medical decisions. However, those are people who have periods where they're lucid, where they can tell their family what exactly they suffer from once they have those things. They can tell their family what the impact of their mental illness is. We believe that family is very well aware of that. They see the suffering. Therefore, if you, as a mentally ill person, in your period when you're lucid, you tell your family what you're going through, that is a case where your family can make a proper decision. In that sense, it is also you who are making that decision, because you ask your family to consider that. Alright, so given that in many cases we're protecting people, and we're giving them a tool to end their suffering, and how that's legitimate, I'm going to move on to show you how they're not protecting anyone within this debate. So, what did they say from the start? They told you that from protecting people from this choice, we're helping them. So if I'm showing you that they don't help these people, then we also win on this clash, moreover, on their grounds. So I'm going to talk specifically about two ideas that were predominant throughout the opposition bench. First of all, people making split-second decisions under duress. Second of all, their idea of palliative care. So, on duress. So they said that many times when people commit suicide, it's under immense pressure and it's a split-second decision. We think it's very weird for opposition to bring that up. We think that people who, for example, lose money in a casino, directly go to floor 30 and jump out of a window, on either side are going to do that. Moreover, on either side of the house, it is going to be a split-second decision where they don't consider the circumstances. So that's our first response. We have it on both sides of the house. However, if for some reason they choose to go with our hospitals to do that, with assisted suicide, we believe that, again, we have a less horrible way of committing suicide. Less people are being harmed. In that sense, if they tell you that people are committing suicide under duress, given that that's going to happen under both sides of the house, our house does that in a less horrible way. So we win under their grounds. But even if these people would choose us, we tell you that in that sense, they are more likely to talk to social workers, for example. That means that if they want to dissuade people from committing suicide, the fact that we're giving them a tool to encounter those social workers, rather than only letting them jump out of, no thank you, their room on floor 30, that is already something that we're dissuading people from committing suicide. If they really want to do that, then under our side we have more mechanisms that stop people from taking that action. We believe that that would win under their grounds. No thank you very much. So lastly, very shortly, on their idea of palliative care. So what did they say? They said that it reduces political capital to invest in palliative care. We believe that as long as you tell people that some people want this and some people don't. We don't see any reason as to why this is mutually exclusive. We don't see right now that, for example, in the Netherlands where euthanasia is allowed, that we don't invest in palliative care. That is for the very simple reason that policymakers and political parties explain that this is an individual choice where people can choose for themselves what they want. In that sense, if you look at like any Northern European country, there's an advanced system of palliative care alongside with euthanasia, alongside with assisted suicide. Like in the real world, this is not a thing, Mrs. Speaker. And we want you to consider that very closely, because this is something that might happen in debate land, but in the real world, this is just not a thing. So, when considering this debate, what do you have to compare with each other? We're giving people who now lead excruciating lives, or for whatever reason, the possibility to choose what life they would have wanted and what life they have lived. Moreover, we give them this excruciating way to opt out of that life, and we're protecting the people that they try to protect. For that reason, I'm terribly proud to propose. Thank you.
The case of the Netherlands is this. There are many people involved in this debate. Some might choose strongly, but they're just analysts, they're just a minority. We know for sure there are some people who would quite like this decision, so we win. They don't, and I'll discuss two groups of people in this debate. First, those who want to give up, and second, those who want to fight on. I'll spend less time on my second area because they refuse to clash with us on this area. One, those who want to give up. Let's be very clear. Both teams agree that where a right is systemically ill and forced, it should not be a right. That's why they tell us children should not have this right, should be outsourced to parents. That's why they tell us the mentally ill should not have this right. So if we can prove that structurally, people who try to access this right tend not to be in a good state of mind, they've lost this debate. So from the beginning of this debate, and to absolutely no response, we asked them a killer question. Would they legalize consensual slavery? We said, what if a man in desperate poverty sells away every single one of his rights to a master in exchange for food and water? He knows by their logic that the alternative of poverty is really, really bad. So he kind of has information. He's thought about this because it's all his right, so he has taken a long-term view. Because they say if information is significant, you will consider it carefully. Both teams would still nevertheless ban slavery because it's unconscionable and because people tend to regret it. We've had absolutely no response, and we've asked them again and again what the fundamental difference is between once and for all choice and their side's once and for all choice. Absolutely no response. So if they concede to this and admit that it should be banned, I submit that the entire case falls. Why does it fall? Because we've given you three clear standards as to when we ban a choice, none of which received any response at all. No. First, when it's coercive. We said, if it's so painful as they claim, obviously people tend to be unable to make a good choice, unfortunately, for no fault of their own. No direct response. Second, we said this is irreversible. There's no opt-out clause for that. Again, no direct response. Third, we said people don't know what death is like. And this means they don't have full information to process its outcomes and therefore can't make an informed choice in this respect either. No thank you. Again, no response. All we really heard in three speakers was broad assertions as to how people will take a long-term view. So I'm going to further this analysis to break their claims once and for all. We've asked them, if it is true that the lives of people are so difficult, how are they in a good state of mind to make such tough choices? In fact, I'm going to claim right now that the worst evil of their policy is that people believe their rhetoric. You know what they tell you? Your life will be undignified. Your life will be hell. It doesn't matter because you will die anyway. This isn't always true, but the bad thing is people believe them. They tell people that your life is worthless, and that's exactly what causes people to push the button. No thank you. Your life isn't always structurally going to be as bad as that. But the bad thing is people believe Team Netherlands, and that's exactly what misleads people into making a false choice. For this reason, therefore, it just isn't true that just because this is a long-term view to do many important decisions that you necessarily be considered in this process. What we say is that their team in their rhetoric misleads people into making a choice they will regret. And that's why we've been very proud to defend the claim that government should earn objective, not subjective goods. Hold on. They have asked us about blood transfusions, drug transfusions, blood transfusions, and our response has been very simple. Sometimes government should act on an objective basis. So when they ask us about how about entering the kingdom of God, our response is government should not take those into account. In the same way we, for instance, ban people voluntarily subjecting themselves to honor killings. Sometimes culture matters less than life, especially for the children that sex even asked us about. We don't believe a parent should be allowed to deny his child the right to life and a blood transfusion. Why is it alright?
But you finally respond to the announcement that you're more likely to go to a social worker if you're not if you're not afraid of being called out.
I'll get to the claim right now. How's our side better for these groups, given that they will make structurally ill-informed choices on your side? First, because we protect them from choices that they will otherwise regret. We've asked them, how about every single individual who's not the person who's very, very sure? How about the teen with mediocre grades, driven to depression and consequently suicide, because they believe that they have been let down to their parents? No response. We also have an unemployed man who's just lost money in the casino. These are people whose lives can get better, but they don't see these at the point they take their lives. And that's why we said we want to make their lives better. This spectrum is especially important because they can see that they will give us the full range of examples, not just those who go to the hospital. No thank you. And I'll prove right now that people don't tend to go to the hospital. Why? They said, well, we're at the hospital, so there'll be psychiatric checks, there'll be social workers to tell you why you should not take a life. Do you think the average depressed person wants to hear that? I don't think they do. At the point that they decide to make the deliberate choice to take their lives, they tend to be fairly certain. No thank you. And that's why going through administrative backlog, subjecting yourself to a week law of hell by their logic, tends not to be a very attractive offer. So on both sides of the house, they will not go to the hospital. They will take their lives by jumping off the cliff and by slashing their wrists. No thank you. The only difference is we can stop them. They will try to do these things on either side of the house, but on our side, when the police officer walks by the man at the edge of the building, he can pull him back into safety. On their side, they will say, no, you should let him and respect his rights. Let him be. Allow him to jump without any of the psychiatric tests that both teams admit are important. So they've admitted a group who should not be allowed to take their lives, those who are mentally ill, those who are ill-informed to make choices, but they have absolutely no safeguard to prevent them. Because people don't want to go to the hospital. People don't want to talk to a social worker because they see them as a hindrance and there's inconvenience when they want to end their lives anyway. So we've said that in the absence of state endorsement, in the absence of state assistance, yes, some people will try to take their lives on either side of the house. The question is a comparative, and we've said if we can have the safeguards to try to stop less people from doing so, our side takes this debate anyway. Finally, we said, how about even for those whose lives will not get better? We've said we'll try our best to help these people. We said, yes, we sympathize with their pain, and we know it isn't easy. We don't promise this life will be glorious or easy, but what we are doing is protecting them for once and for all choice that we promise they will regret. And that's why even for these individuals, we said we're quite happy to suffer palliative care, which is always a better option than taking a life and therefore regretting it in the long term.
What makes you think that the people who make a rash decision is such a big group when they're deciding on the most important aspect of their life, merely itself?
Because many times people are structurally incapable to make choices when they're under huge emotional rigors. We're not saying they're stupid, but we are saying that due to an unfortunate confluence of factors, they're just ill-placed. And that's why even if their lives are important to them, and we do agree it's true, given your exact rhetoric that their lives are worthless, that's what makes them less considered on the choice. So you can't on the one hand say their lives will be well considered because their lives are important. At the same time claim that their lives are worthless because they're sick, because they're helpless. That's what drives them over the edge, and we are not fine with that. So consequently, first and foremost, those who want to give up are protected under our side of the house. Second, how about those who fight on? We've said many people choose not to die. We've asked them what their response is for all these people to choose this dignified option. We first of all said, we make them better. We give them a better choice because we improve palliative care. They said it's not mutually exclusive. We can still fund this anyway. Our question is, when is it easier to fund it? And we said when there are numbers, when there exists a large number of people who need this support, that's when it tends to be easier. And that's why they asked us about Europe and said, well, they legalized assisted suicide and look at the great amount of palliative care. They did not respond to my second speaker's example, just precisely Denmark, which reduced the amount of spending on palliative care after advancing their policy. So on both sides of the house, there exists a large number of people who choose not to give up. And for these people, we've said we allow them to make the best choices. Their side, mind you, subjects them to the exact same excruciating pain with none of the ability of the state to help them out. So we said that's wrong as well. Finally, we said many times those who want to fight on eventually end up being coerced or pressured by their counterparts. There was absolutely no response to this argument, even though we gave it to you in our first speaker. We told you that in schools like Japan, every single time a suicide occurs 1 week, the week after, the number of suicides increased exponentially. And we said this is concrete third-party harm. We don't want to place the thought of ending someone's life into his head. And that's why their side coerces more people who originally did not want to take their lives to doing the exact same thing. We want to ask them why this is conscionable. So they've not responded to our arguments about how people will not go to the hospital anyway. They've not told us how this is fundamentally different from socio-economic slavery. And on all these bases, they've hurt those who want to give up and those who want to fight on. For all these reasons, I'm so proud to stand in team opposition.
You would expect a poor man to sit in his armchair, calculating the probability of winning a jackpot before he goes to a casino. But you know why this doesn't happen? Because at the point in which people make decisions, very often it isn't a long-term consideration that they have taken into account. Sometimes, even the most important decisions in your life, like a poor man's life savings, is a rash decision as well. The difference in today's debate is that team proposition falls prey to the belief that these are rationally considered decisions. Never once responding to requests, never once responding to the thresholds considered. So let's look at the two worlds that emerged eventually by the end of this debate. The world proposition began as a very narrow world, limiting it only to the really old, which by the way, I thought today dropped already, limiting it only to the terminally ill. And even then, when they were willing to engage with everyone else, they assumed that on either side, they would have to take their lives. Not realizing that when a poor man wants to kill himself on the roof of a casino, a security guard is obliged to hold him back. They don't let him be obliged to. Even when individuals have states of lucidity when their mental illnesses, apparently, they realize that these individuals shouldn't make their own decisions. But why? We realize sometimes individuals under circumstances of duress should not be allowed to make decisions. And in this case, every individual who chooses in their life often are in these circumstances. No response. They were a world of oddities. They believe you can make decisions on things you do not know or do not understand. But they dropped that eventually. So let's just sweep that under the carpet after all. They were a world of concessions. They believe that you should dissuade individuals. So they admit that crime is probably a bad thing to do. They believe that some people do make rash decisions. That's why they're willing to say these people will jump off the cliff. Anyway, but most importantly, they dropped their angle on information. So by that third speaker, there was no mention as to how people will adjudicate the choices. Importantly, this is because very often choices need information in order to ensure it's not a false choice. They dropped societal harm, which came out right from first opposition, where we told you it is legitimate grounds for third-party harm to ban such an act. They told us, in fact, that the minority of individuals who use threat is something you're willing to accept. But we told you repeatedly, these individuals are often the most vulnerable, and the people we exactly need to protect, and the point at which you make this right legitimate. They were a world of hate, because they hurt individuals who choose not to die by diminishing palliative care, as happened in Denmark. But most importantly, people believe their world. People believe their lives, and people believe that the decision now to take my life is a decision that I've considered long enough, and is a decision that will make my life happy. We'll move away from social workers, move away from hospitals, exactly because of the world and veterans. Let's compare this to the world of the opposition, where if a poor man chooses to take his life on the roof of a casino, a security guard is obliged to hold him back. So, the comparative is not they will take their life either way, it is which side has more people in their life. And very often it is team opposition, because they don't have safeguards to take into account. We protect the threshold of consent, but we ensure that you must get the consent of no duress, reversibility, as well as full information before you can make a choice. In fact, that is why we ban consensual statement, something that eventually dropped and implicitly conceded. We give individuals a time. Individuals who choose not to die get better palliative care, better care during their end of life. We prevent thought suicides from people engaging in third-party harm simply because their thought of suicide comes to their mind at the point in which they see a close friend killing himself. We protect the most vulnerable of individuals who choose to take their life, but sometimes not rationally. We protect the rest of the individuals who might be influenced to do so by the word or team proposition. And that is why, at the end of the day, we're very proud to stand by our basic principle that at the crossroads of life, we should never choose the path of death.
Every single human being on this planet is going to die. Therefore, this debate wasn't necessarily about if you're going to die or not, but how you want to spend the hours, the days, and the years on this planet. We told you that if you think it's very likely that those hours, days, and years are going to be spent in pain and in torture, you have the right to shorten that period. And you have the right to move on to the next phase, whatever that may be, because it's legitimate for you to choose so. We think that therefore we came to you under the team line that our life is for the purpose of happiness and not for suffering. Two classes that I want to discuss in today: the people who will regret it and the people who won't regret it. So on to the people that won't regret it. We tell you that the terminally ill are, like per definition, are always going to have a bad life forward for them, right? Terminally ill means you are going to die, you are going to suffer. We think that we gave you analysis why therefore this group in itself has the right to do so. And we tell you that the only response we get from opposition was the medical industry might get better. Our third speaker dealt with that by saying that it's not your burden to bear if you think that that wait is going to be too long and too painful. The second thing they said is that you lose political capital. And our third speaker dealt with that as well by saying that that's empirically not true in all the countries where we have euthanasia. So they wanted to talk then, they realized that they should just mention that the other group is far bigger. But that means that they can see that this group, this terminally ill group, even if it's like a small group, does know what's ahead of them and does fall under all of their criteria for free choice. So that means that they accept the principle for this group in itself, therefore concede the principle of our case. We think that that's why we already win, simply on the terminally ill and the people who can already judge the rest of their life. But let's play it on their terms, right? The people who would regret it, and tell you why we win on their side as well. So they wanted to talk about how people commit suicide in a split second, right? And how, therefore, when the people who failed at doing so then realized that it was a wrong decision to do so, only after they already tried it once. We think that we told you that there's not a policeman, not a security guard downstairs at the front door to already stop you from throwing yourself off the building, something said in our second and first speaker already. We told you that therefore this group will already commit suicide, but not under our side. Because under our side, they know that there's a less painful option, that they might die peacefully and without feeling all the pain. So this group is going to postpone that split-second jump off the building and go to the hospital the next day. We told you that that means they have 24 hours to reconsider, but more importantly, when they are in the hospital, they're going to encounter all of the social workers, the psychologists, psychiatrists that are going to give them the information, that are going to give them the information about what can change about their terminal illness. We are exposing them to them. They can't offer the same because under their side, that social worker is going to report them to the police, is going to keep them under severe attention. We think that under their side, that social worker never falls in the picture, something we said throughout the bench. So we win for this group. But even if there is a group that would still commit suicide, we tell you that that group is far smaller than all of the other people that we are helping. And we think that in the end, this debate was a trade-off debate, right? Because we told you that the terminally ill were the biggest group because those are the ones that will always want to commit suicide. We told you that the link that they make from you might want to commit suicide and the other day you would not was a very vague one because we don't understand how people who are so iffy on the matter of committing suicide would be a part of this debate anyway. We think that this is a very marginal group. We said so in our third speech. So we tell you that on the trade-off we win because the people that are for certain a part of this debate the terminally ill, the people who would have committed suicide anyway, are all better off under our side. And we think that the other group, which we are uncertain about, is a smaller group, and therefore we should always protect the ones that we are certain are part of the survey and whom we are certain we can stop the suffering from for the next few years. Please vote in the proposition.